Here we go again. It's Wednesday, right? Yeah, because I started on Tuesday. It's very confusing when you have a Monday off. But we're ready to go. We're going to talk more about state government, about EVs, about all the stuff going on, because State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott is here. And, Rob, nice to have you back with us. Thank you, sir.
Hey, glad to join you, Todd.
You're on the Transportation Committee, is that right?
No, I'm not.
Oh, what are you? I thought you were, man. Did you used
I'm on
to be?
like every committee, but not that one.
Not that one, huh? So
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I serve on 4 committees. I'm the ranking member, which is like the minority chairman on the Elections Committee. Mm-hmm. I'm also on the Judiciary Committee. I'm on the Housing Committee, which is going to be a huge issue next year. And what am I missing? I'm on another one, too.
See that? Even you're confused by your own activities.
I blocked it out, Todd. It's too.
It'll come into your head. Who's that guy who was running for president a few years ago and had that blank out? The governor of Texas, Perry. Remember him?
Yep.
He couldn't remember his campaign theme.
Yeah.
So you're doing okay. What's your involvement then as somebody who's not directly involved via committee with this EV stuff? Are you part of the conversation at all, or do you just stay home?
Yeah, no, I think I've been a big part of the conversation. I held some forums in my district. I held 3 forums. I actually have 2 more scheduled, and we'll certainly continue to talk about this subject along with some others. And I think it's the pushback from the public that ultimately made the governor and the Democrats stand down on this issue, at least temporarily. And, so it's me and, my good friend, Senator Jeff Gordon, Senator Henry Martin, and a few others that, have been out there trying to, raise hay and make sure people understand what's actually going on. That just like tolls. It's the same. I heard you mention that, I think, to Brian yesterday, mm-hmm. maybe, that about
this morning,
the tolls. Yeah, the tolls issue was really about, the public finally being engaged on a political issue and speaking up to the point where the large Democrat majorities, even though they have the votes for these things, they backed off because they realized that there might be electoral consequences. And I think that's where we are now. I really want to talk about yesterday's press conference, though, because I got to tell you, that was the most disgraceful display of just toxic dishonesty and partisanship that I've seen out of politicians in the political role. I mean, people do that during campaigns, mm-hmm. but when you're acting as the actual officials, especially integrating the executive and legislative branch on a policy matter that's as important as the future viability of the planet, for crying out loud, you'd think that they'd want to inject some honesty into that, but they weren't. They were just completely toxic, dishonest. Can
you explain that, please? Because to me, it just seemed like normal, rope-a-dope nonsense, but it didn't seem profound in any way to me, so explain.
Well, I mean, they attacked the Republicans as the party of no for no reason, and that we don't have a plan. But we're the only ones who've offered any sort of plan to address issues with the environment. The Democrats' EV plan is just a mandate. And I'll make a correction, by the way, because people keep talking about 2035. But the fact of the matter is it actually goes into effect right away. I mean, 2027 is the first date that there is a strict requirement for a percentage of EV vehicles to be sold by dealers in the state. And that would preclude the sale of gas-powered vehicles, as early as a couple of years from now. So, I mean, it's dangerous.
In certain cases, how does it graduate up to what happens in 2035?
Yeah, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I seem to remember it was in the 40% range that electric vehicles have to be 40% of the vehicles sold in new car dealers in the state of Connecticut by 2027, had that regulation been adopted.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on? Well, did you want to talk about the press conference anymore, or should we move on to the policy?
Well, we can talk about both, and I mean, I think we will naturally cover both topics. Did you see yesterday, by the way, Todd, that the car dealers across the country issued a letter to the president? Nearly 4,000 car dealers in America signed onto a letter asking the president to back off on the EV push.
That's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tremendous. I wish we had it a week ago. And they point out that, yes, there was a lot of hype and hope about, electric vehicles early on. And there was a lot of early adopters, and early demand seemed very strong, but it is really withered away. And now they're having a great deal of difficulty because there's got these cars piling up on their lots. I think they say that they're stacking up on the lot. People are not ready for them. And I think the Democrats underestimate how much people love their cars and how smart people are to recognize that the EV technology is just not ready.
But if you look at electric cars and the early adopters over the last several years, and the people who are excited about their Teslas and their Rivians, the new one, and everything in between, there is a certain class of people who can afford to have a vehicle, an extra vehicle that's recreational, that I think is a big driver of the adoption of electric vehicles. And then you have other people who just love the technology, and it's certainly lovable technology. It's just that it's not for everybody. So it seems natural that there would be a drop-off at some point where the more affluent hobby owners of a third car, or people who happen to have a lifestyle so that one of their cars can be an EV and the other one can be a normal car that you can drive somewhere a fair distance away if you need to. But eventually that's going to start to peter out. And even with the big bonuses the government's giving you to try to get you to buy one of these cars, you have to be able to meet the lifestyle requirements of what a battery that needs recharging means for your ability to go places.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is that these cars are in their technological infancy, and they are good at some things and not very good at others. And it is a specific group of the marketplace that actually has the ability to adapt to the vehicles that are available. The high-end Teslas, that is an excellent extra car. That's a great way to put it. Almost everybody I know that owns one, that is not their only vehicle. They recognize that they're going to have difficulties using that car in difficult weather or going on a long trip. And, most people don't have that luxury. Not everyone has a garage. Not everyone has the money for multiple vehicles. And again, people love their cars. I'm a car guy. I ran a speed shop. I used to drag race. I love my
drag race
and motorcycles.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So the whole idea of forcing people into a vehicle, I listened very carefully to this press conference. I listened closely to what the governor was saying. And what I didn't hear was any talk of why and how the conclusion was reached. And was there a process at all, or is this just a political process? When I listen to the governor talk, I don't hear, and Martin Looney and Matt Ritter, I don't hear anybody talking about how this conclusion was reached by our elected officials, that we should be switched over to a technology that is impossible right now to implement. So they're passing along a law to force us into a vehicle that they can't provide the infrastructure for us to be forced into. So they say, don't worry about it. Obviously, things are going to change over the next few years. So why don't we put in a 5-year revisit to the thing? Well, I thought we had an emergency. 20 years ago, they told us it was urgent. We had to urgently change and dramatically reduce the what we're pouring out into the atmosphere. And now 20 years have gone by, and they say, well, it's a lot worse. Now it's really existential. But they're saying existential. They still won't fix the electricity by doing what they should do, the obvious thing, the only clean energy there is, nuclear. They won't do that. And now they won't do hybrid cars, which is really a short-term answer that makes sense. They're pushing electric cars. Why, Rob?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. There's so much that you just said, and I agree with every word of it. I mean, they had the nerve to try and paint their position as if somehow it's market-based, when it's all about authoritarian government force and ignorance of the technology and science. They want to claim that they're science people, but look at the people that were up there speaking yesterday. I don't know that any of them know anything about the environment or anything about science. I mean, they refer to carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Pollutant is the other half of what we breathe besides oxygen. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're just confused about what they're speaking about, and they're trying to implement force. I don't know if it's simply because they want to, virtue signal to people on the far left who are focused on, global climate change and so forth. Even if you buy into all of those arguments, and this is what I've been saying at my forums, which is that I'm not against electric vehicles. I love the technology, and I like Elon Musk. I want him to be successful and sell lots of cars. The thing is that he needs to compete in the marketplace by producing a product that people want to purchase. It's just that simple. Mm-hmm. And they're just not there yet.
Yeah, well, it's a hard place to get. The insistence that we buy them, the forcing of it upon us, is the part that gets me. And it strikes me that there has to be a goal. And we know it's not a policy goal because they haven't told us any policy that they believe in. They say electric cars, they don't tell us why. They don't have an answer for how. And they don't have a replacement for the gas engine, even though they want to cancel the gas engine, and they're pretending that electric can do it, but they know that electric can't. And they confess that quite readily when they say that, well, the governor said, I can't predict what the future is going to hold, and there could be a supply chain problem. And yeah, he's right. So why would you bet the whole house? Why would you pass a law on something you know nothing about? Isn't that motivated by money, the money pouring in from the federal government?
Right. Well, I mean, there's not that much money. I just looked this up this afternoon. It was all part of the federal infrastructure plan, which I think was $1.2 billion or trillion dollars, something like that.
1.2 trillion, yes.
Yeah, the state of Connecticut is getting hardly any of that money. I actually have the figures. I had one of the guys. It was a $1.25 trillion infrastructure bill. The state of Connecticut is going to get a measly $53 million worth of that, which is far less than 1%. I think it's 0.5%, actually, over the next 5 years. And that is designed to build charging stations within 5 miles of busy interstate highways, which means that there's not going to be any charging stations built with that money in rural areas across the state, only along our major highways, 84, 95, 91, and so on. And that's it.
Yes, but that's just one element of the whole infrastructure package and the part of it that applies to energy, because there are also rebates and other spending moments that appear inside this plan that mean more money pouring into all the states, including Connecticut. So this, well, forget about the amount, though. Isn't there a compelling argument to be made that if you're Ned Lamont and you don't care about public policy anyway, and you don't think about it, it doesn't interest you. What interests you is being popular and being a big shot, right? That's what we've learned about the governor. So if he's forcing a policy that makes no sense onto us, we have to look and say, well, it makes no sense to us, but it makes sense to him. Why does it make sense to him? Well, maybe it's important to the president. And maybe it being important to the White House. We know they care deeply about this green stuff, and that's why they appropriated this $390 billion out of the 1.2 trillion that was particularly focused on this. That's there for a purpose, right? And doesn't Ned want to hope? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know how far your tongue is in your cheek when you're saying all this, Todd. I mean, I don't think that these people have thought about anything. They don't operate based on policy. You know, this is one of the craziest things. Whenever I deal with constituents and people are always coming up to me suggesting great ideas for government, this is what you guys should do.
They don't want those ideas.
Yeah, but I have to immediately tell them, I'm like, that's not how the state government operates. I assume that's not how the federal government operates. They are there to try and promote whatever is necessary to preserve their electoral viability in the future. That is it. They don't care whether it's good for the people or it's going to make the world better or it's going to save the planet even. It just sounds good, and this is what they've bought into, and this is what they're going to sell to the people, and they have this much ego, this much narcissism, and this much hubris to think that it's fine, that they should just be allowed to go out there and say things that have no basis in fact or truth and promote policies that are going to have real negative impact. That's the thing about this time. The positives are all unknown. You ask them the positives, they have no answer for anything. But the negatives are all knowns. We know exactly what's going to happen if you put this mandate in. You're going to put people out of business. People are not going to be able to afford to buy vehicles. Gas stations are going to be out of business. And then what? Will you have to, travel 100,000 miles in your electric vehicle to go get gas to put in your electric generator in case, you have a bad winter? I mean, none of it makes any sense on its face, and they have no answers to that. And yet they have the nerve to indicate that we're playing politics. Yeah. We're not playing politics. We are trying to defend the people of the state against what I see as an authoritarian regime that does not care about good policy.
Yeah, I think all that's true. And yet they are out there doing their thing. And so they do have a motive. And I agree with you that it's hard to convince people, because I've been saying this for 7 years, and I'm amazed at how people call me up and say, Todd, if they want to solve this, why don't they just do that? And I say, because they don't want to solve that. You assume that they're thinking about the well-being of us, and they're only thinking about the well-being of them. And so you and I are doing the same thing and up against the same wall. We have this built-in assumption of goodwill amongst the political class. And outside of you and a few others, I don't see it on display. I want to play you something, Rob. This is, just because you said that, this is the biographer of Mitt Romney. His name is McKay Corbin, I think. And I just thought this was funny with respect to what you're saying.
Early on, he's told...
I'm sorry, this is about Mitt Romney going into the Senate and thinking about how exciting it's going to be a U.S. Senator, because that's the big time.
Early on, he's told by one of his Senate colleagues, look, 20 senators do all the work here, and 80 of them just go along for the ride. And so Romney decided early on that he wanted to be a workhorse. He wanted to be seen as somebody who was ready to roll up his sleeves and work on policy with members of either party. But what he found was that even among those who were really, saw themselves as legislators, there was not a lot of long-term thinking in the Senate. Climate change was an example. He assumed that, and I think this speaks to sort of Romney's institutionalism, that somewhere in some room in the United States government, there were serious-minded, thoughtful people who had a master plan for how to address these kind of generational issues that America was facing.
So then he goes off into climate change and talks about how, Mitt wanted to meet with the climate change people in the U.S. government who thought about it, the internal think tank. And it turns out there is no one.
Of course not.
They don't think about it. They just make up a policy.
Right. And, of course, everything that if there is such a room and there are people working on policy about any given political topic, their job is not to come up with solutions. Their job is to somehow come up with evidence to prove the salient points that the politician is making, whether they're
to cover the butts.
Not. Exactly. It's affirmation, bias or some kind of term like that. But that's what it's all about. There's very little focus on, because you remember, elected people are not necessarily talented, intelligent, or expert at anything.
Or experienced in getting things done.
Right. I mean, I don't know anybody in the Connecticut General Assembly who knows really anything about the environment, climate change, electric vehicles, anything more than the conversation we're having, or the few newspaper articles, or maybe even somebody really interested read a couple of books on the subject. But we're not experts. And this is another reason why government has to be limited in its scope and power, because you are putting people in charge of making massive decisions that affect the lives of millions of people. It is so dangerous when government decides to run amok, and when they have the press wrapped around their finger, and everybody in this particular situation, because it's such an emotional issue. The fact of the matter that we're talking about saving the planet. And it's a great way to vilify the opposition by suggesting somehow that people that don't agree with their policy
don't care about the planet.
We don't care about the environment. It's such a ridiculous argument. I have to start every one of my forums with this discussion to say, I care about the environment. In fact, Todd, I was going to be a scientist when I first went to college. I ended up going into business programs because people pointed me in that direction, said, if you want to make some money. But I've always loved the environment and science, and I've been fascinated by it my whole life. Of course I care. The argument that somehow Republicans don't care about the environment is ludicrous.
All right, we just have 30 seconds left, so wrap it up for us, Rob.
Well, they're going to come back with this stuff next year. But again, we defeated this, vote yesterday the same way we defeated the tolls, which is by making sure that there was enough noise out there in the environment of Connecticut and people knew what was going on and were unhappy about it to the point where the Democrats got cold feet. We need to keep that pressure on. Yeah. And the danger is that, this has got to stay pressure for a long time. We don't go back into session until next February.
That's all right. This is visceral.
Elections, too.
This is visceral. It is like the tolls. I agree with you. Rob Sampson, State Senator from Wolcott, great to talk with you. Thank you for your help.
Always my pleasure, Todd. Thanks so much.
Talk.